And let's talk about anger, outbursts, and lying. So, how can someone writes in, how can we, parents and children, proactively deal with strong emotions during the pandemic? How can parents with or without ADHD help themselves, and how can they help their children? We, parents, are at our breaking points, and the kids are learning from the behavior we model. Well, this is a terrific question because I actually think whoever wrote this parent has hit the nail on the head, that our kids learn from us. They see what we're doing, they see how we're doing it, and they follow our lead, whether it's what we're doing in real time in terms of behavior or language, or what we're emoting. Our kids are picking up our signals all the time. And so I think the first way to deal with strong emotions during the pandemic is accountability. Let's own it. Let's acknowledge that you might be struggling, perhaps without getting into too much detail, and let's also let's admit that none of us really know what we're doing right now. This is a time unlike any I've ever lived through, and probably not like anything you've ever lived through. And so we're being asked, uncertain and unclear as we are, to help our kids feel more certain and secure, which is almost an impossible task because we're struggling ourselves, right? So the first thing that we want to do is deal with the first of my 5 C's, which is self-control. Manage yourself first as parents. What kinds of things trigger you? What kinds of things help you calm down? We want to identify both of those categories because then you can notice when you're becoming dysregulated and you'll know what to do to help yourself get back on track. So, just so you know, technologically, because we're so messed up today, I don't know why, Annie is going to send me comments via text. So I apologize again for why I do not see anything in this live section commenting. And I'm going to keep going, and I look forward to getting some of your questions and in this unusual kind of arrangement. So we want to manage ourselves. That means we have to notice, and then we can help our kids do this. What are the bodily signals? What are the signs that we're veering off over the cliff, as I like to say? And some of those signs are, you might have a flash of anger. You might notice your heart rate goes up. You might suddenly feel really hot. These are ways that our body is sending us signals that we're getting upset. And our kids have these same signals. We want to help our kids notice the signals, and then we want to come up for a plan on how to respond. Ideally, that plan would be something that's soothing. Perhaps it's playing with the dog. Perhaps it's going to the bathroom and washing your face. Perhaps it's stepping outside for some fresh air. These are all things that we want to brainstorm with our kids about what they can do. But there's another piece to this. We have to brainstorm with our kids what it would mean not to cooperate with this plan that we have in place. Because inevitably you'll create something to manage big feelings, and then in the moment of the big feelings, your kids will say, I'm not doing that. That's stupid, right? So instead what we want to do is we want to have a plan for a piece of that plan for non-cooperation. It's very important right now for people to do something, parents to do something that feels nurturing, at least if you can once a day, and at least once a week. And when I say nurturing, it doesn't have to be going on a shopping spree or maybe having a fancy manicure. It could be something as simple as having a cup of tea and reading the paper. It could be going out for a run. It could be having your kids get on their scooter and you walk alongside of them really fast and get your heart rate up, because exercise bathes our brains in endorphins, and these endorphins make us feel good, and we need that feeling good to get through the day every day right now. So that's the first thing. And the second thing I want to say is, yes, you're at your breaking point. And let's be accountable to that. Let's say to our kids, this is hard for me too. You know, this is hard for you and it's hard for me. We're all struggling. You don't have to have all the answers and you don't have to be perfect. What you need to be is authentic and connected to your child. That was what's going to help us get through because the authenticity and connection foster resilience. The other thing that fosters resilience is being able to have some idea of times in the past when you were able to succeed. And what were the things that helped you succeed when you faced those challenges? Anxiety is great at creating amnesia in our brains. So what we want to do is maybe write down, oh, this happened. When this happened, I did this. When that happened, I did that. And that actually, if we could put that up, we'd have some access to tools and resources exactly in the moments when we need them. So I hope that answers some of your questions. Please, I'm getting some comments from Annie. So I'll start with the first one. I feel like I'm apologizing all the time for yelling. I make sure to apologize and mean it. My daughter seems to get it as she often apologizes as well. So we want to, I want to say to this parent, I'm glad that you're actually owning your behavior. And we want to be careful, particularly as women and raising girls, not to apologize all the time. Maybe there should just be one apology at dinner, which is, hey, you know what? I lost it. In the morning, and then I lost it again before dinner, and I regret both of those times. Because one of the things that girls and women do, we learn to do as we grow up, is apologize for ourselves. And that kind of creates a toxic mix about perfectionism. So instead, what we want to do is own what we did and brainstorm how we could do it differently. I got angry because I'm frustrated with having to work at home and also make sure you're having a decent summer, and sometimes it feels like too much. How could we work on this together, right? Sanford says, please comment on the cycle of parents' reactions to behaviors of anger and resistance actually keeping that loop of reactivity going. This cycle doesn't help the needs of the child. So this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of managing ourselves first. We have to manage ourselves first because the more activated we get, the more activated our child will become. We are fueling their fire. And so what we need to do is actually take care of ourselves in the moment first so that we can be calm and clear-headed. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. My favorite thing is to go to the bathroom. Go into the bathroom, close the door. Kids understand that people go to the bathroom by themselves. Wash your hands, wash your face, tell yourself something encouraging. Whatever chaos is on the other side of the door will still be there, but you'll be more centered. It's very important that you don't actually try to up the ante when your child is inappropriate. The kids have told me over and over again that it's very distressing to them when they feel out of control and their parents meet them at that level. It doesn't help them pull themselves together. So here's another question. How can I help my daughter cope with her emotions? She has emotional fits when she doesn't want to do something. For example, she will bang her head against the wall, pull her hair, tear up her room, and yell at the top of her lungs. It's extremely challenging and stressful dealing with her in that mood. Well, of course it is. There's actually no thinking that's going on. Your daughter is in the middle of an amygdala hijack. And what we want to do is to get the amygdala back into its place. So our brain is often called divided into three centers. So the back of our brain is the physiological center. It's often called the reptilian brain. It has to do with heart rate and blood pressure. It's what keeps us alive. The middle of the brain is often called the mammalian brain or the emotional brain. And this is where the limbic system, which is really inside the limbic system, is where the amygdala lives. And that's that fight or flight mechanism. And when we're stressed and strung out and angry, our amygdala will come out and it will take over the human part of our brain, the thinking part of our brain, okay? And this part of our brain is where executive functions sit. And when this part of the brain is taken over by big feelings, it's like a tidal wave of feeling. It goes on vacation to the Bahamas. And so now our emotional brain is running our brain, and our emotional brain is not supposed to run our brain. Our thinking brain is supposed to run our brain. It helps us execute tasks, right? So what we want to do is get that emotional brain back into place. And this is why we have to have a conversation in a calm moment about things to do when you are dysregulated. You cannot have a conversation when someone's dysregulated about what's going to help them calm down in that moment, because their thinking brain is in the Bahamas. Instead, what we want to do is have a plan. When you do this, that's a sign to me that when you start banging your head on the wall, that's a sign to me that we need to stop and think and act. I call it the stop, think, act. So we're going to stop what we're doing and take a break immediately. We're going to have a time apart. And for some kids, it's actually, I need to sit on the couch next to you and have you read me a story. I might want a hug. I might want a glass of lemonade. For other kids, I'm going to go to my room and listen to my favorite music for 10 minutes. It takes between 10 and 15 minutes for the fight or flight stress response to calm down. So we want to slow things down, because when we're in a stress response, we are speeding things up and things get out of control. So in this situation, ideally, we'd want to help this girl before she bangs her head. But this, once she's banging her head, she's already in an amygdala hijack. When she's heading, when you see her activating, that's when we want to use some of these interventions. And they're very individualized interventions. What things would help you when you start to get activated? And as a parent, what's helpful for kids to hear is, I see that your voice is getting louder. Is that a sign that you're starting to get angry or upset or worked up? We want to help identify the process, because then we can decelerate. So I have a few more comments here. Harlan says, we also have all of the additional pressures of political disagreements. Lots of teens are starting to individualize their political stances, and I'm seeing major increases in stress. Any ideas about discussing politics with objectivity, keeping in mind rejection sensitive, dysphoria, and emotional dysregulation? That's a great question, Harlan, because today's teens and tweens even, and I would dare say even fourth, fifth, and sixth graders are very aware of what's going on in the world. Even younger children, people are wearing masks. They see that the world is changing. They have questions, and they also have anger. You know, with all of the racial injustices that have really come to light, particularly in the United States, in terms of how our police departments are dealing with people of color, how our government is dealing with color. There's a lot of conversation about these topics, about racial injustice, housing injustice, you know, food insecurity, job insecurity. And so these are conversations that are wonderful to have with kids, and that we want to create a template for having these conversations where people don't end up yelling and screaming at each other. And the best template I can give you for that is reflective listening. Oh, okay, I heard you say that you're upset about what the federal government's doing in Oregon. That's interesting. What about it is upsetting to you? Or I heard you say that you're upset that there's so many new COVID cases and there's not enough hospitals for them. Tell me about what bothers you about that and what your concern is. You're acknowledging how they're feeling, and you're not actually undermining it, but you're asking for more information. You're coming from a curiosity. And I think this is very helpful for young people because they're still formulating their ideas. And a lot of kids with ADHD are formulating their ideas while they're speaking to you. So they actually, they've thought about it and then they're testing it out. And particularly tweens and teens are going to test it out against their parents and see what kind of pushback they get, and sort of be defining themselves and their ideas in the process of that exchange. So take a deep breath. State if you feel like you're being insulted or put down by a comment. Ask them if that's what they really are meaning to do by sharing their opinion. And if things are getting too hot, you can stop the conversation and say, well, I think we've talked about this enough for now. Let's come back and talk about it another time. Okay, so I have another comment here. Mostly my son's attitude is accepting of the situation, but he has unexpected outbursts at times that display pent-up frustration. I'm having a hard time getting cooperation from him to exercise and do physical activities to provide an outlet and help minimize pent-up frustration. With fewer kids playing outside and a lack of group activities allowed, his motivation is lessened. Yes, so a lot of kids actually really are just spending a lot of time on screen, and then they get what I used to call the TV cranks, or now I call them the computer cranks, and so they have trouble transitioning off their screens. They don't know what else to do, and they actually really benefit from exercise. So what I would do is I would incentivize the exercise. And have your son or daughter do some exercising with you or with friends in order to gain some of the screen time that they want to have. We've got to set up these give and takes because kids are not right now super motivated to just be outside. It's hard to connect with their friends. It's possible to go bike riding. I have one client who rides a bike for hours with a friend. They're both wearing masks. They ride around the park. I have another client who gets together with some of his friends and they are wearing masks and gloves and they throw the frisbee. So we might have to make this physical activity or these get-togethers somewhat different. Perhaps you could facilitate having a child over to your house so you could supervise and make sure they're being safe at the same time. Okay, I have a couple more texts. Maria says, I have a 17-year-old who is showing extreme thinking on the current issue of racial protests and police brutality. We have tried to find ways to support him helping the cause, but he becomes overwhelmed with irrational thoughts of violence. Yesterday, he left the house in his PJs to join the protests. Well, I'm impressed with his passion. And I know that for a lot of young people they have a lot of passion about this. I'm reading an excellent book right now called So You Want to Talk About Race. And I would recommend this book for a lot of parents of kids particularly kids who are really feeling, for parents of anybody, because it's such a great book. Let me just flat out give my endorsement. The author talks about her experience, and maybe Annie, if you know the name, if you could put the name and the name of the author in the comment section, that would be great. Kids want to talk about this, and we owe it to them to talk about it with them and to help them find appropriate ways to channel their energy and their passion. So a lot of kids feel a lot of pressure right now to make things better, and particularly kids with ADHD. Now is like they want these changes to happen immediately. And as we know, in our country, changes take time, and political movements get things going, and then they get sort of snowball with their own energy and process. But we have to be open to talking about whatever racism or racist beliefs we are harboring. And I think we live in a racist society, so we all have racist beliefs. And also, what kinds of things are particularly moving to your sons and daughters? What kinds of things would they want to participate in? Could you work with them? Could you go to a rally? Could you go online and participate? This week, Attitude hosted a wonderful talk by a psychologist in Atlanta on dealing with racism and ADHD. It was fantastic. I hope that Annie, you can put the name of that in the comments as well. Let's see. Regina says, what happens when you get emotional and are in a discussion and can't control your emotions when trying to explain what's on your mind? That's a great question, Regina. And in that moment, remember how I talked about how when the amygdala gets involved, when the emotions get involved, things speed up. They're going so fast, blah, 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 and you actually can't control your emotions enough to explain what's on your mind. So what you need to do is slow things down. Take some deep breaths, zoom out, get a glass of water. You don't have to explain everything at the pitch up here, right? You need to explain what's going on for you in a way that makes sense with what you're actually feeling. So take the time you need to do that, okay? Melissa says, how do I get my child from being verbally aggressive with her siblings when she gets upset when they touch her things? She feels like she always has to be in control. Well, that's a wonderful question. These are great questions today, by the way. Thank you so much. So when kids are verbally aggressive with siblings, they also can be physically aggressive. And there's a lot of, in a family, there are often arguments between what's mine and what's yours, what you can touch, what you can't touch. This is very frustrating for parents because we're like, what's the big deal? But for kids, it's very important. And particularly for kids with ADHD or who are on the spectrum, they often don't feel a sense of control over their lives. And so they want to have a sense of control over their stuff. Right? So if I can control my stuff and who's touching my stuff and who has access to my stuff, then I have some kind of control. And what we want to help your daughter with is coming up with some key phrases to use in those moments that aren't verbally aggressive, but that are very clear. When you touch my stuff, blah, 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 or I don't like it when you da, 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 da. And so that those are acceptable things for her to say to her siblings. And you may need to remind her and cue her about this probably a billion times, but you are continuing to feed her 1, 2, or 3 solid statements, and maybe write them down and put them on a Post-it or two in different places around the house. So you can say, before you say that again, I'd like you to check your Post-it, okay? Annalise says, my daughter chooses midnight to come in and talk to me about heated issues in the world. I'm laughing. I'll tell you why in a minute. How can I get her to choose a better time to converse about social justice? So I'm guessing your daughter is a teenager because teenagers have this incredible ability to talk to you when your eyelids are drooping and you want to go to sleep. So when you want to talk about issues of social justice with your daughter, I think it's great that she's coming to you. I'm sure that you've asked her, could we talk at a different time? I'm tired. I have to go to bed. And so maybe what I would do is talk for 5 minutes and then say, well, this is a really great conversation. Could we continue it tomorrow at such and such a time when I'm a little bit, when I have a more brain power available to me? Because you want to talk to her, maybe in the car, or maybe going out for ice cream, maybe watching the news and then muting it. Try to figure out with her some other times, as well as maybe a few minutes at midnight. I think she's coming to you because she wants to be seen. Obviously, she wants to be heard. She's having some distress, and she needs that contact with you, that attunement. Helen says, my son is really well behaved, but very aggressive in his voice and finds it hard to form friendships. Any tips? Yes, so that's a great question. So a lot of times people will manage their physical impulses, but their verbal stuff is just cruel, mean, and very distressing. And so what I think would be important to be able to say to him is, it is to help him notice, first of all, his tone of voice. And I call this TOV. We don't have to go into a whole lecture about it. You just notice when he says something, TOV. And this would be preceded by a conversation. Hey, sweetie, I think sometimes you say things in ways that you don't realize can, push people away. And this would be a great thing for us to work on. And so I'd like to agree that if you're talking in a way that seems like it's a little bit off-putting, I'm going to say TOV, so you have a chance to redo it. This will show him that actually what he's doing isn't wrong, but that he has a chance to do it better and differently. Okay. Keep your questions coming. This is a very strange sort of dynamic, but it's working. So let's see. Both of my kids are worried and depressed. One is withdrawn. One is having angry outbursts. Both are having difficulty sleeping at night and then sleep all day to avoid life despite our best efforts. My football choir outgoing son is withdrawn and sad and snappy. He is avoiding decisions about football and choir. You know, I was just reading a very interesting article about how oppositional behavior and defiance can mask depression, which is something that I'm quite familiar with, as I've seen in my practice many times. And I think that a lot of kids right now are very distressed. I don't want to say that a lot of kids are depressed, but I think a lot of kids have a lot of disappointment, a lot of sadness, and yes, depression. And withdrawing is one manifestation. Being angry, having angry outbursts is another. And they're worried. What's going to happen this fall? How will I stay safe? I don't want to, get my family sick, but I also want to see my friends. So this is a really a difficult a situation. I think that in these cases where kids are withdrawn and sad and then angry, we want to have some conversation about what's going on, and maybe it's a conversation like, what I'm afraid of is, what I'm most angry about COVID is, and it's just to help them talk about it. And perhaps your kids would benefit from talking to someone else. And maybe as a family that would work. A lot of therapists are seeing families online and talking about some of the challenges of living with COVID. And that might be useful for you as well. Punky says, my 10-year-old will break down, crying, kicking, pulling hair, banging his head, and repeating words or questions over and over again. I talk with him and answer his questions and let him know his behavior is not okay. How do I get him to settle down so we can talk when he's done thrashing? Good question. So, is there a place in your house where he can go and thrash about safely? Because it seems to me that although his behavior is not okay, he has some physicality that he has to get out. Do you have a basketball court? Could you get some sort of beanbag punching thing for the basement? If you live in a small apartment, could you get one of those paddles with the balls attached, and they can, just get that energy out, and maybe talk about that with your 10-year-old. Like, I know when you get upset, you have all of this intense electrical energy and you got to get it out and you got to get it out. And but crying and kicking and banging your head, these aren't effective ways to get it out. So let's come up with, you and I together, a few things that you can do to get that electrical energy out, and brainstorm them. And then when just gently just redirect him. Hey, you know what? We agreed no head banging. Instead, you can do this. Because again, in that moment, all your child is a throbbing emotion. And so we have to help contain that emotion and give it some alternative ways of expression. Okay, so here's someone else writes, remote learning was awful. His ADHD got the best of him. He defaulted to fight or flight mode in regards to assignment completion, resorted to lying that he was completing them, and then he wasn't. It took a lot of parental support, encouragement, and grit to get him on track. And then someone else wrote, remote learning was awful. I would say it was 40% outbursts, 20% quiet defiance, 10% distraction, thinking the computer is for gaming, 25% me learning the material and then teaching it and then helping get it submitted back online. Only 5% of the effort was actually absorbed new learning. Oh, and 200% stress for me, basically becoming a homeschool teacher. And all of the above doesn't even touch the fact that my other child needs learning help as well as alongside a sibling struggling with ADHD. Now, I can imagine that parents right now are freaking out about what's going to happen with school. I'm freaking out about what's going to happen with school for all of you, for our society, for my clients. Remote learning was a crisis response. It wasn't planned, and now we're thinking about doing it again. We're going to have to do it again. One mother says, my son's anxiety was palpable, lots of tears, feelings of defeat, overwhelm, and some shame for lying. How do we face this reality all over again? Well, this is a great question. And as a matter of fact, not to be shamelessly self-promoting, but I'm doing a webinar for Attitude next Thursday on exactly this question, which is called Ready, Set, Pivot. But I'll give you a little preview today. And essentially, what we first have to do is acknowledge how what happened in the spring was a crisis management, that nobody really knew what they were doing. The plans were put together last minute, sometimes barely with Scotch tape, and you were doing the best that you could. He was doing the best that he could in a very unexpected and compromised situation. This fall, we hope that schools will have learned something from the spring experience, and that they will be able to engage kids with ADHD or learning challenges or high functioning autism more effectively. I also think it's important, really important, for you parents of kids with ADHD, LD, or HFA to get resources for your kids. If your child has a 504 but might need an IEP to get through hybrid learning, put in a request for that. If your child doesn't have a 504 because was doing okay with accommodations in real-time school but now needs a 504, let's make some phone calls. Now, some school districts are more responsive than others, and I know that in districts that are particularly cash strapped, that the turnaround time for getting accommodations for kids can be far longer than any of us would like to see. But now is the time before school starts to sit down with your child and if you have a partner and a guidance counselor or principal, and talk about what happened in the spring and brainstorm what kinds of supports need to happen so it doesn't happen again. I work with a young girl, and she had just started high school, so she was in her first year of high school, and she had a supported learning teacher, and this teacher was actually great because the teacher in 8th grade told her, I really can't help you very much, but this 9th grade teacher really believed in my client and believed that she could actually do the work. And so they met every day online for 30 minutes. Sometimes it was with another student as well. And they got through some of the homework. Sometimes it was for an hour, you know, as a rotating schedule. So let's try to make sure that kids have the support they need. If you are a parent and you are not an educator yourself, you're being asked to do something for which you do not have experience. We are we can do the best we can. I'm not a you know, elementary or high school teacher, so I can do the best I can, but that's not my training, right? So if I'm being asked to do this now, then I need more support from the school. What kind of support do you need? Let's make that happen. Okay, Colleen says, I'm doing my best to keep a schedule this summer, one that includes one-on-one time with me, outdoor time, exercise, etc. But my 7-year-old is always pushing back, refusing to do anything, even if there's an incentive. What can I do? He's happy with a puzzle or a brand new Lego or a toy. Colleen, first of all, good for you for trying to keep a schedule this summer that includes all of those things, one-on-one time with you, outdoor time, exercise time. And your child is pushing back, sometimes refusing to do anything, even if there is an incentive. So my sense is that your child might be overwhelmed and might need more decompression, quiet activity. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that your child is pushing back because your 7-year-old is actually, in some ways of their executive functioning development, basically more like a 4-year-old. So perhaps the schedule, if you could create it more like a schedule for a 4 or 5-year-old, you might have better success. And in that case, less might be more. What I get a sense of is that your child is happy to be a little bit in his imagination. So could we link the puzzle time to following the outside time? You know, I don't have a magic wand answer for this, except that we want to create balance. It sounds like you're doing the best you can to do that. But I do think that he's pushing back. And I'm curious about that pushback. What words would he say to use to explain what's going on? Is he overwhelmed? Is he tired? Is he disappointed? Is he sad? Is he worried about going outside? Let's try to get some more information if you can. And if you have that information, please send it along and I'll respond to that as well. So we are almost out of time. We have about 4 minutes left. So I'd love to take a couple more questions. I believe that there should be a link for you to a downloadable that I'm giving you, a free downloadable. If you go to my website, www.drSharonceline.com, I think the link is there. And you click that and it's on managing anger. If it's not there today, I will make sure that it's there next week. Do we have any more comments as I wrap up? I see the 3 dots. So, you know, I think one thing that I want to say while I'm waiting for the 3 dots to load is that I find kids to be really struggling. They are not quite, they're not themselves. A lot of kids, they're pushing back, they're unhappy, they're more anxious, and they are, they're uncertain. And it's very, very difficult for any of us to stand in uncertainty for a prolonged period of time. And for kids, it's particularly hard because kids don't really have future thinking brains yet. They're really in the present. They can have some idea of the past, but they can't actually see into the future enough to know that at some point, maybe a year from now, God, I hope it's not a year, but as much as a year, this will shift. So that's hard. And no one can assure them when it's going to shift. And that's very, very unsettling for kids. Joe says, My 12-year-old son was recently diagnosed with ADHD. Emotional deregulation leads to violent outbursts. He feels remorseful after each incident. Where do we start? So his remorse is your starting point. His remorse is his acknowledgement that he's behaving in a way that's not acceptable. He just can't catch himself before it happens. So what we want to do are two things. One, we want to get a sense of if he's noticing when he's getting activated. Two, can you give him a signal that he's acting inappropriately or heading in that direction? What would that signal be? And what's the agreement about how he's going to receive that signal? And then three, if he blurts out something that's not appropriate, could he have a take back of the day? I'm a big fan of the take back of the day, because sometimes I say things I wish I hadn't, and I just want to take them back. It's like, you see that bubble when in cartoons, and you just want to suck it back in. A lot of kids with ADHD tell me it's like the words get out, and they're like, no, wait, come back. So if we could give him an opportunity to have a take back of what he's saying, that's a start. My bottom line is the violent part. Violence is not okay. It doesn't promote an atmosphere of trust and safety in a family. And that's what being in a family is supposed to do. It's why you're supposed to have. You want to feel safe and you want to trust the people in your family. So I would set some guidelines, whatever the things are for you in your family that are absolutely the bottom line. You may not kick the wall. You may not push me, whatever it is. And what the consequence is for doing those behaviors. If you kick the wall, you will be spending money and time with me on getting it fixed. If you curse directly at me, bad words, you could hand your phone over for the rest of the night. The kids have privileges, but they also have to learn that A plus B equals C. And that's not about punishment. It's about logical consequences. What is the logical consequence? So I want you to try to focus on that if you can.